Hello and welcome to ShameOver, where you can lose the hangover, not the booze. I'm your host, Erica Mallery, and this is a podcast for those interested in moderation and drinking less, and who want to find peace and balance in their consumption. I am on this journey with you, and I am proof that you can drink less without going cold turkey or all out sober. If this sounds good to you, let's get started. Welcome back to the final part of my conversation with licensed psychotherapist Marrilee Burke. If you have made it through parts 1 and 2 already, then you know this conversation goes so far beyond alcohol. If you haven't, please feel free to go back and listen to them. Otherwise, just pick up here, totally fine. But what I want you to know is drinking is rarely just about the drink. It's about our identity. It's about safety, stress, fun, control, connection, just the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and who we think we're allowed to become. And in today's episode, we're diving into one of the biggest things that I personally think keeps people stuck. And these are labels. I have an addictive personality. I'm just the party girl. I'll never be someone who can only have one. This is just who I am. But what if those actually aren't facts? What if they're just stories that got repeated so many times that they started feeling permanent? We also talk about why labels can sometimes keep us trapped, the problem with the all or nothing thinking, why progress matters more than perfection, and how self-awareness and self-compassion are often the real catalyst for change. This episode is deep, reflective, empowering, and honestly, such an important reminder that you are not stuck being the same version of yourself forever. So let's get into this final part of the conversation. Awesome. So what are some other tools that you really recommend when it comes to mindful drinking?
So journaling is great, especially for moments when you're fighting to stay within your goals, right? Mm-hmm. Let's say you're having an evening when you're planning to drink. I recommend that people do this mindfulness check-in. So there are 5 steps to it, and it's really important that you keep it to under 5 minutes, because if your check-in takes too long, it's not practical and you're not going to do it. So the check-in that I have people do is they start with noticing their emotions. What are they feeling emotionally? Are they stressed? Are they sad? Are they angry, frustrated? Any emotion that you're not enjoying feeling, once you start drinking, is going to go away, but then you're not going to want to go back to feeling that way. So you might be inclined to drink more than you set out to. Yes. So just notice what your emotions are, and just being aware of what could trigger you to drink more before you start drinking is going to give you more control over it. Yes. And it's going to help you to make a plan. So you want to notice your emotions. You want to notice physical sensation, especially tiredness. Like if you're really tired, but you have this event or this dinner or something you have to go to, when you start drinking, it's going to alleviate some of that tiredness. But then when you stop drinking, you're going to be even more tired. So you might not want to stop drinking. So just be aware. If you're tired, maybe say, you know what, I'm tired. I know I'll feel better when I start drinking, but I don't want that to be my strategy for the whole night. So I'm going to come home at 9. I'm going to set a limit. Even if I'm having fun, I'm going to make myself come home so that I don't keep drinking to fight the tiredness. The third thing is noticing any triggers. So these are going to be things that are specific to you that could lead you to drink in a way that's not what you want. So for instance, if you're going to a party and you find out your ex is going to be there, or, you're having a fun night with your friends, but you have this presentation you're really stressed out about the next day. Anything that tends to be something that makes you drink more, just be aware that it's going to come up, right? And don't, pretend like it won't. Be like, well, maybe it's going to be fine to see my ex. If it's not going to be fine, it's not going to be fine. So then you can make a strategy around that. And maybe it's also like, I'm just going to leave sooner, or I'm going to stick to hanging out with this other person, whatever it is. Now, and the 4th and 5th ones are really important. So the 4th one is setting your goals for the night, because if you don't have a plan, you can't stick to your plan. So you want to be as specific as possible. So this is going to include the number of drinks that you'd like to have, what you're going to drink. Maybe, you can go overboard if you have cocktails. So maybe you're going to stick to wine. It could be the time of the evening that you're going to cut yourself off, or the time that you're going to go home. It can be things like, how are you going to get home? Because you might go, oh, well, I'll just go and I'll have one drink and then I'll be able to drive. Is that really realistic? Do you have a plan in place for in case you decide to keep drinking? So setting really specific intentions for what you want the drinking experience to look like is really important. Because again, if you don't know what you want to have happen, if your goal is just to not overdo it, that's not really specific enough for you to be mindful about while you're drinking. And then the last one is about setting a mantra. So a mantra is a statement. It's like a 1-sentence statement that you repeat over and over again. And this is a thought that you want to have later on the evening. So let's say it's time to go home, or you've had enough to drink, but you want to keep going. It's whatever you want to think later. So it might be something like, I want to feel good tomorrow, or I want to be in control, or I don't want to regret tonight, or something,
Mhm.
whatever you want to pop into your head a couple hours later after you've started drinking. That's what your mantra is going to be. And you can, if you have prayer beads, they have these beads that you just slide each one every time you say the mantra. If you have those, that's great. You can just set a timer on your phone, set a 1 minute timer and say your mantra. If you can say it out loud, that's really helpful, but it doesn't have to be out loud if you don't have the privacy. But just say this thing to yourself over and over again for 1 minute. And then you're much more likely to connect to that part of you that has an
Mm,
intention later on in the evening. Because a lot of times what happens is the part of us that intends to drink in moderation goes away. They go to bed early, and then the
exactly.
drinking parts are up and they're partying. And it's really easy to forget that we even had an intention if we don't really drill it in.
Yes. So, how does that work with you have this intention, I want to feel great tomorrow, but then they're on, drink three, four, and they're like, I want to have fun more now. And again, in their mindset, fun now means drinking more. So tomorrow's off. So where does that come in?
And that's why you really want to be super clear with yourself about what your intentions are and
Yep.
why. And the mantra is kind of like the why. So like if you
Mhm.
say, I only want to have 3 drinks, I want to leave by 10, the mantra is why. And so it's kind of reminding you of what your goal is and why that's your goal. And the idea is the more you practice this, and it might not work the first time. The first time you do the whole mindfulness check-in, you might forget all about it when you go out drinking and not have a great night. But the more
Mhm.
you practice it, the more you're in touch with those parts of you that want to drink in moderation, even though they don't typically show up. They'll start to show up more when
Yep.
you need them to, if you kind of invite them in.
Yes. My one of my number one things to follow is that plan and prepare, which basically is a lot of exactly what you said, but being specific. And I
Yeah.
think most people kind of plan like I'm going to have 2 drinks tonight, but then the preparation piece to me is that getting specific. So maybe it's looking at the menu and seeing exactly what those drinks are. And,
Mhm.
like you said, like, how am I getting home? Am I driving? So if I'm driving, then that already should much keep you much more contained, obviously. But, doing your homework so that you know exactly what you're going to have. And yes, things might change. You guys plan to go here, you end up going here instead, but still having done that work, you're going to be much more likely to stick with your plan than if you just wing it.
Right. Exactly. And like a vague goal, like, I remember a long time ago being like, well, I don't want to get wasted. And I kept getting wasted. And it's like, I never once in my whole life said, I want to get wasted tonight. That was never my goal. And yet it happened a lot because
Mhm.
when you're drinking, when you're having another glass of wine and then another glass of wine, you're not thinking, I'm in the process of getting wasted. It just kind of ends up that way. So that's
Yes.
why it's really important to have specific numbers and types of alcohol. Sometimes, certain alcohol can give us problems. Like sometimes wine is the problem because it tastes good
Mhm.
and it just goes down really easy. So it's like, okay, I'm just going to have this like hard liquor on ice that I don't really like that much. And then I'll sip it and then it won't become a problem. So just having a strategy, like you said,
Mm.
is really important. And again, like really reminding ourselves that there's a reason for this strategy. It's not because sometimes somebody's drinking and they think, well, I'm not supposed to have another one. I'm supposed to stop. And then it feels like a drag. And then the rebel comes in and says who? But it's important to remember because I want to feel good, because I want to control my drink. I want to
Yes.
drink in moderation so I don't have to give up drinking altogether.
Yes. And that's, I guess, the exact point of that mantra so that you are remembering that. Cause I feel like so often we feel like it's a punishment to
Mhm.
not drink or to stop drinking. And I'm like, no, flip that in the script. Like, no one is forcing you to do this. Well, for some, but if you're
Mhm.
not doing it, you're for yourself, everyone else is just benefiting from it. It's going to be a lot harder to stick with. So reminding yourself, like, this is not a punishment. My reward is not being hungover tomorrow.
Exactly. Yeah. And reminding yourself like you're choosing this because in that moment, the part of you that is choosing moderation or choosing to change your relationship with alcohol isn't there. So you
Yes.
really need to remind yourself, oh, I'm not doing this because of that study I read that, about how bad drinking is for you. I'm not doing this because someone gave me a hard time last time that I got drunk. I'm doing this because it's what I want to do. And it's really important to remind yourself of that in the moment.
Exactly. And one of the things you had said, I never said, and that reminded me of something that I remind myself of my clients all the time that I never once have said, I wish I drank more
Mhm.
or I wish I drank last night. So whether I just drink in moderation or I didn't drink, I've never ever wish that I either had drank or that I had drank more. So I'm
Right.
just like, this is just something to remind ourselves like, we're always having a great time. We don't need more to continue that great time. That actually is the quickest way to kill the buzz is by trying to maintain that buzz.
Yes, exactly. Or to drink so much that you don't even remember whether you had a good time or not.
Exactly. Yes. So are there any other tools? I know you've given us a lot to work with, which I
Mhm.
really, really love and appreciate that. Are there any other big things that come up that can be helpful for people that you've found?
I think, with regard to mindfulness, I would just
Mhm.
stick with those two kind of different
Yep.
strategies depending on if you're planning to drink or planning to not drink. And then in terms of tools, I think it's just getting to know your different parts. And I'm sure you've talked about there's a book called No Bad Parts, and it's an
Mm,
IFS book, but it's not for therapists, it's written for anybody. And it has exercises in there that you can do that can help you get to know who these parts are because you probably have multiple parts that want you to keep drinking the way you are, and possibly multiple parts that want you to change. And it's important to remember they all have your best interest at heart, even if they seem
exactly.
hypercritical and kind of mean. They're trying to help you. Even if they seem like self destructive, even if they're literally self destructive, even a part
Mhm.
that wants you to die thinks that death would be better for you than whatever painful experiences you're having. So it's like, even when they're literally self destructive, they're not really trying to hurt you. They really think that's better for you.
Yes. And it just reminds me like how much safety matters, feeling safe, because alcohol has provided us safety for so many times, even if really it's done the opposite for us, like put us in really bad situations or, led to other things. But ultimately, we've turned to it because it does make us feel safe and comfort and cozy and, just that good.
Right. And a lot of it is, over time, our identity around alcohol gets really cemented. I hear clients say to me all the time, like, well, I'm just never going to be the kind of person that can just leave wine in the bottle, that can just open a bottle and not finish it. And it's very limiting when we tell ourselves, like, this is who I am when it comes to alcohol. I
Yes.
used to tell myself this story, and I say story, I don't mean story like it's a lie, but it's a story, right? That's how we view
Mhm.
ourselves through the stories of our lives. And I used to have a story that I used to say, I'll never be the kind of person who could just have one glass of wine with dinner. And
Mm,
of course, spoiler, now sometimes I do just have one glass of wine with dinner. And so I was asking myself, I was thinking, like, well, who did I think that person was? The type of person who would only have one glass of wine. And I realized that back then, I thought that was someone who didn't enjoy feeling inebriated because I had
mm,
never felt any kind of buzz from one glass of wine before. So I
yeah.
thought, well, why would I do that? That will never be me. And it turns out, like, I still do really like the feeling of being inebriated, and I often have more than one. But I also like the taste of wine, and sometimes if I'm having a specific kind of meal, I just want that experience without the full-blown feeling of intoxication. And now I'm older, and now sometimes I do get a buzz from one glass of wine, which when I was in my 20s never happened, and now it actually can very easily happen. So it was just a matter of like, and I asked my clients to really think about, like, who are you when it comes to alcohol?
Mm,
A lot of my clients will say things like, I have an addictive personality. And if that's been your experience of yourself, I'm not trying to like negate that, but I want people to know that we all have human brains. And if you have a human brain, then you
mm,
have a brain that's prone to addiction. And that's everyone. And whether or not you develop an addiction has more to do with your life experiences than the type of person you are or the type of brain
mhm.
that you have. So it's important to kind of question, how are we thinking of ourselves when it comes to alcohol? What are the stories that we're telling ourselves about who we are when it comes to our drinking?
Yes, and that is exactly why me personally, I'm very big into labels and not using them, but that's why even if I were to never have a drink again, I would never call myself sober. Because as soon as that gets in my head, I feel like it's almost like Eve and the apple, like you're thinking about it more, you're wanting it more, needing it more, all those things, which
Mhm.
is why, unfortunately, so many people in AA, they are constantly, having to get new coins to start over because that mentality can be so harmful.
And if you've never learned how, like, what the purpose of the alcohol was, like going back to what you said
Yes.
before, it's always a solution. If you don't know what the problem was that it was a solution for, you might just turn to something else. And that's why there's kind of a misnomer in AA that if you have a problem with one substance, you would necessarily have a
But
problem with all substances. You can't do anything. And that's not always true. There are certainly people who can have a problem with alcohol and then maybe they try cannabis a couple times and it doesn't really do anything. Or
mhm,
when my drinking was at its worst, I had also had some medical conditions that caused me to be prescribed opioids because I used to just give them
mm,
out back then.
yep,
And I never had a problem with the opioids, even though they were
yeah,
right in the cabinet, because that's just not the relationship that I had with that substance. But the reason why sometimes somebody might have a problem with this substance and then that one and then that one isn't because of the substances, it's because they never really addressed what was causing the problems in the first place.
Yes. Oh, I love that so much. And as you were saying, like, because people label themselves addictive personality all the time. And I'm like, great. If you can be addicted to that, then you can be addicted to putting yourself first. Like, let's just reframe it then. And now you're addicted to waking up feeling great. Make that your new addiction,
Yeah, it's great.
because it is so mindset based.
Mhm.
Man. So, what else? Because identity, obviously, that's come up a little bit for both of us. What else do you find you really need to focus on, or for people to really just start with if they're not working with a coach or a therapist or something along those lines, to really start understanding their identity and how alcohol relates in that identity?
I think and this part can be a little bit scary. And it has to do with like our existential sense of responsibility, which is basically this idea that we are responsible for writing the story of our life. And
Hmm.
that's a really scary, huge burden to be
Yeah.
responsible for what our life turns out to be. And what makes it even harder is we're not starting with clean sheets of paper, right? We're not starting, we had all these things like the beginning of the story got written by other people, by our
Mm,
family, by our culture, by all these other things. So it's like if somebody gave you a book that was half written and or a quarter written and said, "You have to make this into a masterpiece bestseller." And you look at the first, quarter of the book and you're like, "This is terrible. This is garbage. How am I supposed to turn this into something fantastic?" But that is our responsibility when it comes to what
mm,
our lives are. So recognizing that there was a time when we didn't really get to have much say in what our life was and the experiences we had. And that's when our brain was being formed to see ourselves, to perceive the world. And sometimes we have to go back and really override that and kind of take that responsibility, which sounds like kind of a negative thing, but it's
mhm.
actually really freeing to say, yes, up until this point, I have been this way, but I'm the author of my story. And on this page, I'm going to write, and then everything changed. And then I'm going to write the rest of the story about how everything got to be different. And it's not that it's easy, it's really incredibly difficult, but it's also a big part of what we're here to do.
I've never heard it referred to that way. Like you described it so beautifully. And I think there's so much, it's very freeing to hear it that way because a lot of the development, you can't, you were just showing up during that time and being taught what to do and how to think and all those things. But that's what's showing up in our behaviors nowadays. So until you really uncover that and understand that, the awareness piece is only one thing, but you can't fix those underlying beliefs without having all of that.
Exactly. And it also isn't fair. A lot of the things that we're struggling with now as an adult, they're not our fault.
No.
And they might not be anybody's fault. It might not even be our parents' fault or anybody that we could point to, but things just went a certain way. And now we
Mhm.
have these issues that we have to deal with. And it's not fair that we have to fix them, even though we didn't cause them. But that
Yes.
is just a part of a reality of being a person is that everyone who comes to work with me, it's like they have to do the work. I'm there to help, but they're the one doing the work and they're the one who has to pay me. And so it's like it's an unfair but universal part of being a person is that you're ultimately responsible for making all these positive changes, even though the way things are might not really be your fault.
Yes. Well, and you look at so many athletes and just really renowned people, celebrities, all these things where they came from terribly abusive environments or really poor families or, all these different things. And now they're some of the most successful people out there. Like that is how you become the author and really write your own story.
Mhm. Right. And then that's tricky too, because if your story was like, I came from nothing, I
Mhm.
worked really hard, I accomplished all these things, I got to here,
Now
I
what?
got to this, I have this beautiful house, this beautiful family, all this money, all this success. And then it's like, well, now what? Because that's been the story. And so it's like,
Mhm.
okay, but now what if I'm only in my 30s or 40s or 50s? I have the whole rest of my life to live. And then that's why people get caught up in these things of like, well, I need a bigger house. I need a bigger yacht. I need to make even more money. I need because it's like that was a great story in the
Mm.
beginning, but now maybe it's time for a new story, but we have no idea what that looks like.
Yes. And understanding that that's a good thing. Like you just have to be willing to be flexible with it and not just be stuck on that one thing. I mean, I definitely learned I used to be much more materialistic and keeping up with the Joneses type thing until I met my husband. And he has made me much more kind like I'm the kind to like I just want to purge all day long, like get rid of all the stuff, like become a minimalist, which that's never was part of my personality, if you will.
Right.
But I'm so happy internally that the external is just parts of it. That doesn't make me happy anymore.
Mhm.
It's the relationships, it's the people I'm with, it's the relationship I have with myself more than anything.
Right.
And that is, I feel like what you really have to work on with this is getting to not only know yourself, but fall in love with yourself.
Yes. And recognize there's nothing wrong with the way you were before. There was nothing
Yeah,
wrong with what you used to value. And
exactly.
if you look back, like there was nothing wrong with being like a party girl in your 20s, right? I don't know if
Mhm.
that was you, that was
Oh,
me.
very much so.
And like that, it's not that that was bad. It's just like, who are you now? You
Yeah,
know, and it's like you can embrace that, like, yes, this is how who I was. And, I was cool and I was fun to be around. And you could still be cool and fun to be around, but not
exactly.
drinking excessively. And just it's like a little bit trickier because it's like some of these stories are archetypes that we fall into and recognizing, oh wait, I'm not just an archetype. You are maybe when you're young and you're figuring out your identity, but then you get to a point where you think, wow, there are all these options. Like the world is kind of wide open to me and I can be so many different things. I don't need to fall into this party girl archetype. And I don't have to fall into the like, really, maybe uptight housewife or uptight
Mhm.
mom or, anxious mom or soccer mom or whatever that's supposed to look like. I don't have to fall into any archetype. I can just be all the different things that feel right to me.
Yes, and it should feel easy, but I know that we can get trapped into the expectations that we feel others have for us or maybe that we put on ourselves that can be very limiting.
Right. Exactly. And that's the thing. It's all limiting. Any kind of
Mhm.
story that we tell ourselves, especially if it involves the words like never or always,
Yes.
or it's just a straightforward, like, I am this way. Again, there's a part of you that is
Mhm.
that way. And that's when it's good to go back to the parts and recognize, yeah, but there's another part of me that wants something else. There's another
Yep.
part of me that is just as real. It's maybe not as present, but it's just as real that maybe wants something different. And like, I think that's a big part of becoming a full fledged person is recognizing all your parts, not just the parts you've been
Yeah.
validated for or recognized for, not just the version of you that other people know and like, but recognizing there are many, many, different facets and like exploring them all and giving them all their moment is really part of having a complete life.
Yes. And I love that you had brought up earlier, like you personally love being inebriated at times. I'm the same way. And it's very conflicting because I feel like when you see like, in the movies and TV shows and all of that, like it's glamorized, but then in real life, especially if it becomes problematic at all, it's completely opposite. So that's where all the shame and everything comes in.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like there's a kind of cool version of drinking that we see. And also, I see on in film and television, everybody's got a drink, but you don't see them having the second one and the third one and the fourth one. But that's
But
what
they're always with a drink, even
yeah,
though,
but
yeah,
they're
that
always
drink
gonna
didn't last 6 hours, but you
yeah.
also wouldn't be behaving that way if you only had that one drink, like, yeah.
Yeah. And some shows do a good job. There have been like a couple shows. I remember this episode of Sex in the City, kind of famous episode where she had the photo shoot the day after she was drinking and she was smoking a cigarette and she just didn't look very fresh and she thought they were going to do makeup and they didn't. And so it's like sometimes you do get to see like,
Mhm.
uh-oh, that the
Yeah.
next day there are consequences to always having a drink in you.
Mm. Well, and just how much that especially the habitual drink. Most of the people who I work with are more the habitual as opposed to just the random binging, which, have that as well. But it's how that habitual can catch up with you over time, because normally it's just that 1 or 2 glasses of wine that turns into 2 or 3, that turns into the bottle, and then all of a sudden you wake up one day and you're like, what am I doing?" So, yeah.
And
I
that's what
remember that Sex and the City episode, so good.
And that's when tracking can be really scary because when
Yeah.
you start to see those numbers in the beginning, but what's great about tracking and why I always really encourage people to stick with it is those numbers are going to go down. And you'd be surprised how often I'll be working with clients for months. And let's say they have a really bad night. They have more than drinks than they intended to, or they had a week where they didn't have a dry night after months of having a dry night
Mhm.
consistently. And they'll feel like they're not making any progress because it's kind of that AA mindset of like, you have to start all over if you
Yep.
don't meet your goal. And I say, look at your total number of drinks, like where you were when you first came to me and where you are now. And that you having a week without a dry night is an outlier. There was a time
Mhm.
you'd gone years without a dry night. And now
Yeah.
it's unusual to have a week where you don't have a dry night. And that's what progress looks like.
Yes, and that's why the tracking is so important because you don't have that data to physically look at when you need it. And
Exactly.
especially over time, seeing I mean, I have people who I have been working with me for years because, as we said, like it's not about the alcohol. So we're we're diving so much more into such deeper stuff than just, the surface level drinking, if you will. But when they get frustrated, I'll do their starting out assessment and look and be like, okay, let's see how many drinks you were having when you first came in. Like you haven't been doing this for how long? Like, so
Mhm.
yeah, you're upset that you had 3 last night, but like you said, that's an outlier, or that is not something that you're doing every single day. Like, give yourself that grace.
Or hangovers. Pretty recently I had a client, she had her first hangover she'd had since she'd been working with me in a really long time. And she was really beating herself up. I thought I had a handle on this. I thought I was doing so much better. And I said, "Dude, when you came to me, you were having a couple hangovers a month. And now you've gone months without one. And that is progress. Like, look at how far you've come, that you've gone from a couple a month to going months and months, to the point where you're shocked that you ended up with a hangover. And then of course, we do the work to figure out what had happened and what went wrong and learn from it, as opposed to just beating yourself up over it."
Yeah. Well, and on that note, if you're drinking less, you're going to get a hangover more easily too. So what used to give you a hangover after X amount of drinks, now you're probably not even half of that will give you the same type hangover.
Exactly. So really, it's something to celebrate. It's like, wow,
Yeah.
I drank
For
so
me,
much
yeah,
today.
I'm like, totally. When I had a hangover after like a glass and a half of wine. I'm like, this is not fair. Like, I used to be able to drink a bottle of wine without a hangover. Part of me is really pissed about it because I want to be able to drink it and enjoy it. But the other part of me is like, this is data. My body's saying that's too much for me right now. So there you go.
Right.
So yeah. Awesome. Well, I know we're right about at time. I wanted to see, was there anything we didn't get to chat about that you wanted to make sure we covered?
I don't think so. I think there is another piece when it comes to working with the parts of, like, well, who gets to be in charge kind of, but I don't think we have time to go into all of that. So no, I think this was what I loved about this conversation we just had is when you work with people, and this, who have issues with alcohol, it goes in so many different directions. No two people are ever the same, and you get to go to really deep places. Sometimes it's more about habit change, but a lot of times it's about like really deep, very specific things to that person. But we all kind of start off in the same place, which is like the mindfulness tools and understanding the different parts. And so that is where I always start with people. So it's nice that we got to talk about the stuff that's kind of universal, that's the first couple sessions anyway. And then it goes in a million different directions from there.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, how can people find you? I'll make sure to include it in the show notes too, but how can people connect with you or
It's
learn more?
just MarrileeBurke.com. And I'm licensed. I see clients in California and Florida. And if you live in a state that is not California or Florida, I might be able to be a registered telehealth provider there. So if you want to reach out, you can. But definitely if you're in California or Florida, then reach out if you'd like to chat.
Awesome. Well, this was so beneficial and helpful and informative and all the things. So thank you so much for your time. And I appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you so much for doing the podcast and for everything you do to help people. And thank you for letting me be a part of it today.
Yeah. And you too. You're doing great work. Keep it up.
You too. Thanks.
What a beautiful way to wrap up this conversation. I personally think one of the most powerful reminders from this episode is that your relationship with alcohol is not your identity. You're not bad because you overdrink, especially once in a while. You're not broken, especially not if moderation feels hard. And you are definitely not doomed to stay stuck forever just because this has been your pattern up until now. Patterns can change, brains can rewire, and stories can evolve. And honestly, that's what this entire journey is really about. Not perfection, not becoming a different person overnight, and definitely not white knuckling your way through life, but instead learning how to understand yourself more deeply so you can finally start responding to yourself with awareness instead of shame. I am so grateful to Marrilee for this conversation and for the work she's doing in the world, helping people create healthier, more intentional relationships with alcohol. If this 3-part series resonated with you, I would love if you shared it with a friend, posted it on some social, whichever your favorite is, or left a review, because that is truly what helps me so much in this space and what helps more people find this message and realize that they are not alone. And if you're sitting there thinking, okay, I know I want things to change, but I don't know where to start, please know you do not have to figure this out alone. There is support, there are tools, and there is so many different ways to drink less without hating yourself through the process. So please go to my website, shameover.me, or use the links in the show description to learn more. I have a reset that is crazy powerful. It is intended to do over 30 days, and it can truly help this transformation, especially if you feel like you're stuck or you just need a reset. So until next time, lose the hangover, not the booze. ShameOver is the mindful drinking program designed for women who desire to drink less without losing the booze completely. If you want to transform your relationship with alcohol and live a healthier, confident, and balanced life, go to shameover.me and get started today. You deserve it, you're worth it, your future self thanks you. Cheers!